A 31-year-old woman sought solitude on a multi-day solo hike in Colorado, but disappeared into the vast wilderness instead. After an intensive search yielded nothing, her trail went completely cold for 2 years, leaving only the question of how such an experienced outdoorswoman could vanish. The first hint of an answer came from the discovery of her degraded gear, and a memory card found concealed in her shoe proved she had left behind a final, desperate message. The mandatory attendance briefing for the Denver Police Department's newly promoted command staff commenced promptly at 8 a.m. on September 14, 2015. It was a room defined by rigid punctuality and the heavy weight of expectation, filled with officers stepping into roles characterized by heightened responsibility and intense scrutiny. When the name Officer Crumweed was called during the roll call, it was met only with silence. In the structured world of law enforcement, missing the first day of a command assignment wasn't merely unprofessional, it was an immediate, glaring anomaly. Piper Crumweed, 31, was known throughout the department for her meticulous nature, tactical precision, and unwavering reliability. This promotion was a significant achievement, the culmination of years of dedicated service. Her absence was immediately alarming. Initial attempts to contact her failed. Calls went directly to a voicemail box that was already full, suggesting her phone had been off or out of service for some time. The concern escalated rapidly. Department officials contacted her parents, Jarek and Myrna Crumweed. The information they provided shifted the anxiety from a missed appointment to a potential crisis in the high country. They explained that Piper had taken authorized leave immediately before the promotion took effect. Recognizing the demands of the upcoming job, she had sought a period of decompression, a necessary reset, before the pressures of command consumed her life. Her chosen method was ambitious and characteristic, a solo, multi-day thru-hike deep within the rugged expanse of Rocky Mountain National Park, RMNP. It was a trip meant to clear her head, a chance to immerse herself in the high-altitude wilderness she loved. The problem was stark. She was scheduled to complete her hike 2 days prior, on September 12th. By the morning of the 14th, she was significantly overdue, and her parents had heard nothing since she began the hike. Jarek and Myrna were already grappling with a rising panic. They knew their daughter's capabilities. Piper was not only an experienced hiker, comfortable in the demanding Colorado terrain, but she was also a trained police officer. She understood risk assessment, navigation, and wilderness survival better than most. For her to vanish without a trace suggested something far more serious than simply losing the trail or suffering a minor injury. If Piper was missing, something external had intervened. By midday on September 14th, Piper Crumweed was officially declared a missing person. The urgency was palpable. This wasn't a typical case of a lost tourist. This was one of their own. The investigation began at the last known physical location. Park rangers quickly located Piper's vehicle, parked securely at the designated trailhead, specified in the backcountry permit she had filed. The car was locked and undisturbed, offering no immediate clues. It sat silently, a stark marker of where her journey began, the surrounding mountains towering overhead, indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. Investigators established the timeline based on the last confirmed contact. It was a brief text message sent to her mother 5 days earlier on the morning of September 9th. Sent from the vicinity of the park entrance, it confirmed she was starting her ascent as planned and that cell service would soon be non-existent. After that message, the digital trail went cold. Piper Crumweed had shouldered her heavy pack, complete with a blue backpack and a green foam sleeping pad, and walked into the vastness of the Rockies, seemingly dissolving into the thin mountain air. The mobilization in response to Piper Crumweed's disappearance was immediate and massive. Rocky Mountain National Park is a staggering landscape encompassing over 415 square miles of some of the most rugged high-altitude terrain in the United States. It is a place of towering peaks, deep, shadowed valleys, and weather systems that can shift from benign to lethal in a matter of hours. Searching for a single individual in such an environment is an overwhelming undertaking, a race against time and the elements. The initial strategy focused strictly on the itinerary Piper had filed with the Park Service. It was a challenging multi-day loop, traversing well-known passes and established camping zones. By the morning of September 15th, the park was inundated with personnel. Park rangers, specialized search and rescue SAR teams, volunteers, and officers from the Denver PD converged, establishing a command center near the trailhead. The atmosphere was one of focused intensity, the air thick with the thrum of helicopter rotors and the crackle of radio communications. The aerial search was relentless. Pilots navigated treacherous wind currents, conducting low-altitude grid searches, scanning the vast expanses of alpine tundra and dense forests below. They looked for any sign of disturbance, any flash of unnatural color that might indicate the presence of a campsite or discarded gear. On the ground, dog teams were deployed, attempting to catch any scent trail before the elements washed it away. The searchers pushed themselves to the limits of physical endurance, battling the effects of altitude and the emotional weight of searching for a fellow officer. They knew that if Piper was immobilized, she would have the training to signal for help, conserve her resources, and make herself visible. Yet, day after day, the teams returned exhausted and empty-handed. Jarek and Myrna Krumweed arrived at the command center, their faces etched with anxiety. They provided investigators with exhaustive lists of Piper's gear, down to the color of her water bottles and the brand of her hiking shoes. They described her hiking habits, her meticulous preparation, and her cautious nature. They clung to the hope that her skills and experience would keep her alive until help arrived. Simultaneously, detectives in Denver began the routine but necessary background investigation. They examined Piper's life, looking for any hidden stressors or conflicts that might explain her disappearance. They reviewed her recent case files, searching for disgruntled suspects who might have sought retaliation. They examined her financials, her communication records, and her personal relationships. The results were uniformly negative. Piper appeared to be in a good place, with no unusual activity, financial distress, or personal conflicts noted. The investigation confirmed what everyone suspected. The answer was somewhere in the mountains. Days stretched into a week. The initial saturation of her planned route yielded nothing. No discarded gear, no signs of a disturbed campsite, no indication she had even made it past the first day's ascent. It was baffling. How could such an experienced hiker vanish without a trace on a marked trail system? The wilderness remained stubbornly silent. It was during this period of stalled progress that investigators uncovered an unusual detail that dramatically shifted the focus of the search. While examining Piper's financial records and local purchases, detectives found a requisition form from a specialized mountaineering outfitter in Boulder. Dated 3 weeks before her trip, the form detailed a request for high-end technical ice climbing gear, specialized crampons, ice axes, ropes, and anchors designed for glacial travel. This equipment was far beyond what was necessary for the thru-hike she had planned. More importantly, the requisition had been canceled by Piper herself just 2 days after it was submitted. This discovery ignited a new, alarming theory. Had Piper planned a secret, unauthorized detour? Was the filed itinerary a decoy? Investigators knew that Piper was ambitious and constantly sought to push her physical limits. The canceled requisition suggested she had been contemplating a highly technical ascent, perhaps into one of the park's remote and treacherous ice fields. It was a compelling narrative. A skilled officer seeking a final extreme challenge before settling into a desk-heavy promotion might have decided to attempt a difficult climb spontaneously, even after canceling the gear rental. If she had fallen or become trapped in one of these high-altitude glacial areas, the chances of locating her were slim. The terrain was unforgiving, the conditions extreme. This lead felt tangible, a behavioral clue that seemed to fit Piper's personality. Authorities made the difficult decision to divert significant resources to this new possibility. The operation shifted from a standard wilderness search to a high-risk technical rescue mission. Specialized alpine teams trained in glacial travel and crevasse rescue were deployed to specific areas associated with the research found near the requisition paperwork. These areas were remote, far from any established trails, characterized by unstable ice and the constant threat of avalanche. The search operation in the ice fields was grueling and dangerous. The environment was stark, a world of blinding white and deep, shadowed gray. The silence was broken only by the roar of the wind and the crunch of crampons on ice. Helicopters navigated treacherous downdrafts to insert teams onto the glaciers. The pilots performed maneuvers that pushed the limits of their aircraft, hovering precariously close to the ice faces to allow observers to scan for any sign of color against the monochrome landscape. On the ice, the teams moved methodically, roped together, the tension visible in their movements. They used long poles to probe the snowpack for hidden crevasses, gaping chasms in the ice where a fall would be fatal. They employed specialized listening devices, hoping to detect any sound beneath the surface. They searched for days, battling altitude sickness, dehydration, and the psychological toll of operating in such a hostile environment. Every dark shape on the ice, every shadow in a crevasse, raised the possibility of a discovery, only to be dismissed upon closer inspection. The risks taken by the ISAR teams were considerable. The operation was fraught with peril. During one particularly grueling ascent, a localized avalanche was triggered by the shifting ice, the roar of the cascading snow and debris echoing through the valley. The avalanche narrowly missed a search team, the realization of the near disaster underscoring the extreme danger of the environment. In another incident, a helicopter conducting a low-altitude sweep encountered sudden whiteout conditions, forcing the pilot to execute an emergency landing on a narrow ridge. The aircraft buffeted by high winds, the crew stranded for several hours until the weather cleared. Yet, despite the intensive effort and the significant dangers faced, the ice fields yielded nothing. There was no trace of Piper crumbweed. The theory, while compelling, remained just that, a theory. The technical search was eventually scaled back. The requisition, while intriguing, appeared to be a dead end, a discarded plan that had cost the investigation precious time and resources. During this intense focus on the high-altitude regions, the routine canvassing of local businesses and trailheads continued at a lower priority. It was during this phase that a crucial oversight occurred. Investigators briefly considered the High Alpine Lodge, a remote seasonal establishment located slightly off the main trails. However, because it was not on Piper's planned route and seemed an unlikely detour for a solo hiker focused on covering distance, they dismissed the likelihood of her having visited. No one was dispatched to interview the staff. It was a seemingly minor decision made in the heat of a massive operation, but it meant a critical potential source of information remained untapped. As September ended, the weather in the Rockies began to turn. The first heavy snows blanketed the peaks, and the temperatures plummeted. The window for active searching was closing rapidly. With no concrete leads and the terrain becoming increasingly hostile, the massive search operation was scaled back. The command center was disassembled, the volunteers sent home. For Jarek and Myrna Krumvede, the silence was agonizing. The transition from active search to a missing person case felt like an admission of defeat. They refused to accept that their daughter had simply vanished. Throughout the winter of 2015 and into the spring thaw of 2016, they organized private searches. They channeled their grief into action, hiring specialized teams and continuing to canvass the park whenever conditions allowed. They walked the trails, calling her name, driven by a desperate hope. But the mountains remained silent. A year passed, and the disappearance of Officer Piper Krumweed remained a complete, baffling mystery. July 2017. The high country of Rocky Mountain National Park was deep in the midst of summer, the alpine meadows vibrant with wildflowers, the peaks still capped with remnants of the winter snowpack. Nearly 2 years had passed since Officer Piper Crumweed had vanished. The case had gone cold, the initial urgency replaced by a dull, persistent ache of unanswered questions. For investigators, it remained an open file, a mystery characterized by a complete lack of evidence. For Jarek and Myrna Crumweed, it was a perpetual state of suspended grief, a life paused in the moment of their daughter's disappearance. Elian Wilder was not thinking about missing persons. He was a field biologist employed by the U.S. Geological Survey, tasked with the grim work of documenting the spread of invasive beetle kill patterns in the park's forests. The beetles were decimating the pine populations, leaving behind swaths of dead gray trees, a ghostly reminder of the ecological changes sweeping through the region. His work was meticulous and solitary, often taking him into dense, less-traveled sections of the park, far from the scenic vistas frequented by tourists. He moved through the wilderness with a practiced ease, his attention focused on the minutiae of the forest ecosystem. On the afternoon of July 21st, Elian was working in a rugged area characterized by steep slopes and dense undergrowth. He moved slowly, his attention focused on the bark of the trees, recording data on his tablet. The air was still and warm, heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. The silence of the forest was broken only by the buzzing of insects and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. He was several miles from the nearest established trail, immersed in the solitude of the wilderness. It was late afternoon when Elian navigated a particularly dense tangle of fallen trees, the result of a past windstorm. The area was a graveyard of lodgepole pines, the skeletal branches creating a nearly impenetrable barrier. He was forced to climb over the massive trunks, maneuvering through the deadfall, the exertion taxing even his experienced muscles. As he scrambled over a large, uprooted tree, a flash of unnatural color caught his eye, partially hidden beneath a canopy of fallen branches. It was a grayish-blue synthetic fabric, contrasting sharply with the organic browns and greens of the forest floor. It was partially buried beneath a layer of pine needles and dirt tucked deep within the tangle of branches. His initial reaction was irritation. Despite the park's strict regulations, littering remained a persistent problem, even in these remote areas. He assumed this was another instance of carelessness, expensive gear abandoned by irresponsible campers who didn't respect the wilderness ethic. Muttering under his breath about the disrespect for the pristine environment, he approached the object, intending to collect it and pack it out. It was a small dome-style tent, but it was in a state of extreme disrepair. The fabric was tattered and stained with dark patches of mold and dirt. Several holes were ripped in the material, the fabric stiff and foul-smelling. It didn't appear to have been set up as a campsite. Rather, it looked as if it had been blown there by the weather, coming to rest against the fallen trees, where it had remained hidden for a significant period. The scene felt desolate, abandoned, a silent testament to the relentless passage of time. Elian began the process of cleaning up the mess. He pulled the tent fabric, intending to bundle it up. The smell of mildew and decay was strong. As he did so, several items spilled out from the folds of the material: degraded clothing, a fleece jacket, hiking pants, a pair of socks, and a pair of hiking shoes found near the tent. The sight of the personal items shifted his perspective. This didn't feel like typical tourist litter. The clothing was heavily soiled and degraded by exposure to the elements. The shoes were worn and caked with mud. Then he found it: a waterlogged wallet tucked into the pocket of the fleece jacket. He knelt, the sense of unease growing. He opened the wallet carefully, the leather slimy to the touch, the material threatening to disintegrate in his hands. Inside, protected by a plastic sleeve, but still severely damaged, were several U.S. documents, an identification card. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He looked at the photo ID, but the image was ruined. Water damage and mold had obscured the face, rendering it unrecognizable, a ghostly blur. But the presence of official documents, a wallet, items that no one would intentionally discard, was alarming. This was not litter. This was something serious. He realized he was standing at a potential crime scene. His irritation forgotten, Elian quickly retrieved his satellite phone from his pack. His hands trembling slightly, he powered it on and waited for a signal. He called the park ranger dispatch, his voice tight with urgency, reporting the discovery of abandoned gear and personal documents in a remote section of the park. He provided his exact GPS coordinates and a detailed description of the discovery. Park rangers arrived on the scene within hours, followed closely by investigators from the local sheriff's office and the FBI's Wilderness Crimes Unit. The area was immediately secured, the perimeter established, and the meticulous process of forensic investigation began. The discovery of the documents elevated the situation beyond a simple case of abandoned property. The items were meticulously photographed in situ, every detail documented before being carefully collected and transported to a specialized forensic lab in Denver. The atmosphere at the lab was tense. The discovery of potential evidence in a long, cold missing person case generated a mixture of hope and apprehension. At the lab, the process of cataloging the evidence began immediately. The air in the examination room was sterile, a stark contrast to the organic decay of the discovery site. Each item was examined under bright lights, analyzed for any trace evidence. The degraded documents were prioritized, sent to a specialist for restoration attempts. A forensic technician, tasked with examining the clothing and footwear, picked up one of the hiking shoes. It was a low-cut shoe, primarily beige or light tan in color, with accents of a faded pink or salmon color on the sides and tongue. The laces were a matching faded pink and were loosely tied. It was heavily soiled with dirt, dust, and grime, showing significant wear and tear. As part of the standard procedure for identification, the technician needed to determine the shoe size. This information, combined with the documents, could help identify the owner. The technician turned the shoe over, tapping it gently to dislodge any loose dirt. They then reached inside, intending to locate the size tag on the tongue or the inner lining. As their gloved fingers probed the interior, they encountered an unexpected resistance. Something hard was lodged beneath the insole, tucked deep in the recess of the heel. The technician paused, frowning. It felt too rigid to be part of the shoe's structure, too deliberate to be accidental debris. They carefully peeled back the worn insole. Tucked underneath, intentionally concealed, was a small rectangular object. The technician's breath caught. They recognized it immediately. The room fell silent as they used a pair of forceps to carefully extract the object. It was a black SD memory card. The discovery electrified the lab. The technician held the card up, grasping it delicately between the thumb and forefinger of their gloved hand. The gold-colored connectors were visible, dull with corrosion, but the casing appeared intact. In the context of a potential crime scene, a hidden memory card was a profound discovery. It implied intent, a conscious decision to preserve information. The realization settled in. Someone had hidden this card, hoping it would eventually be found. The implications were staggering. After 2 years of silence, the mountains had finally yielded a clue, a potential voice from the past, contained within a tiny piece of plastic hidden inside a dirty hiking shoe. The 2-year silence was suddenly, dramatically broken. The discovery of the SD card instantly shifted the trajectory of the investigation. But even before the card could be analyzed, the other items found at the scene provided the first major breakthrough in the case. The specialized team working on the degraded documents managed to recover enough fragmentary information, a partial name, a date of birth, from the waterlogged identification card to cross-reference with active missing person cases. Simultaneously, the specifics of the gear, the brand of the tent, the model of the hiking shoes, the type of clothing, were compared with the exhaustive lists provided by Jarek and Myrna Crumwad in 2015. The match was definitive. The abandoned gear belonged to Piper Crumweed. The confirmation brought a wave of complex emotions. For the Crumweed family, it was a devastating confirmation that Piper had likely met a tragic end in the wilderness, yet it also offered the first tangible connection to their daughter in 2 years. It ended the agonizing uncertainty, replacing it with the harsh reality of loss. For the investigators, it validated their efforts and added a layer of profound significance to the discovery. The focus of the investigation shifted from a missing person case to a potential homicide investigation. The focus immediately turned to the SD card. The context of the discovery was crucial. Piper Crumweed was not just a hiker, she was a trained police officer. She understood evidence preservation, chain of custody, and the importance of documentation. The fact that the SD card was intentionally hidden inside her shoe, beneath the insole, was profoundly significant. It was a deliberate act, a calculated decision made under extreme duress. Investigators were certain the card contained crucial evidence, perhaps images of an assailant, a video recording of the events leading up to her disappearance, or a final message detailing what had happened. They theorized that Piper, anticipating her fate, had hidden the card to preserve the information, choosing a location that was unlikely to be disturbed but certain to be examined if her gear was ever found. It was a testament to her training and her resilience, a final act of defiance. The SD card represented the single most important piece of evidence in the case. It held the potential to solve the mystery of Piper Crumweed's disappearance. The card was rushed to a specialized digital forensics lab at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, prioritized above all other cases. The anticipation was palpable. The answers seemed within reach. At the lab, the atmosphere was electric. The team of digital forensic experts understood the stakes. They began the process of data extraction immediately, but the initial attempts met with immediate failure. The card, despite being sheltered within the shoe, had been exposed to the elements for 2 years. The constant fluctuations in temperature, the freezing cold of the Rocky Mountain winters, and the heat of the summers, combined with the moisture that had seeped into the shoe, had caused severe degradation to the internal components. The card was physically intact, but the data stored within the microchips was severely corrupted. The internal circuitry was damaged, the memory sectors degraded. The initial read attempts failed. The specialized software designed to recover deleted or damaged data could not recognize the file structure. The card was unresponsive, inert. The data appeared unsalvageable. The setback was crushing. The realization that their only significant lead, the potential voice of the victim, might be useless, devastated the investigators. The hope that had surged with the discovery of the card faded, replaced by a familiar sense of frustration. The Crumweed family was informed of the situation, adding another layer of anguish to their prolonged suffering. They had been so close to answers, only to have them snatched away by the cruel indifference of time and the elements. But the lab team refused to give up. They escalated the recovery efforts, employing advanced techniques rarely used outside of high-level national security cases. They attempted to bypass the corrupted controller chip, intending to read the data directly from the memory modules. This required a process known as chip-off forensics, where the memory chips are physically removed from the card circuit board and placed in a specialized reader. The process was delicate and fraught with risk. The internal components of the SD card were microscopic, requiring specialized equipment and steady hands. The technicians worked under high magnification, meticulously cleaning the internal circuitry and attempting delicate microsoldering to repair the damaged connections. The team worked around the clock, fueled by adrenaline and the weight of expectation. The specialized equipment hummed constantly, a soundtrack to the tedious effort of rebuilding a digital life from the brink of oblivion. A critical moment occurred during an advanced attempt to dry the card's internal microcomponents using a specialized heating process. The procedure was designed to remove any residual moisture that might be interfering with the electrical signals. But the degraded state of the card made it unpredictable. The internal components were fragile, the tolerances microscopic. The technicians monitored the process closely, the tension in the room palpable. As the temperature increased, a sudden surge of electricity occurred. A localized short circuit flared within the microscopic pathways of the chip. Alarms sounded on the monitoring equipment. A faint wisp of smoke emanated from the specialized reader, the acrid smell of burning plastic filling the sterile air. The team reacted instantly, cutting the power and aborting the procedure. The near-fatal error almost destroyed the evidence entirely. A few milliseconds longer, and the internal memory modules would have been fried, erasing the data permanently. The realization that they had come so close to losing everything underscored the fragility of the evidence. The air in the lab was thick with the smell of ozone and the weight of the near disaster. The team was forced to accept the devastating possibility that the data was unsalvageable. The lab team paused, reassessing their approach. The aggressive recovery methods had proven too risky. They switched to a slower, more meticulous strategy, attempting to rebuild the data bit by bit, a process that could take weeks or even months, with no guarantee of success. They were working against the clock, aware that every passing moment increased the risk of further degradation. While awaiting further results from the lab, investigators refocused their attention on the discovery site. The location of the tent and the gear raised new questions. Why was the gear found scattered and abandoned, rather than at an established campsite? If Piper had been injured or incapacitated, why was there no sign of her remains near the gear? The dynamics of the site were confusing, suggesting a narrative of struggle and desperation. Meticulous grid searches were conducted in the area surrounding the discovery site. Specialized teams, including cadaver dogs, trained to detect the scent of human decomposition even after years of exposure, scoured the dense forest. They combed the rocky slopes, the nearby streams, searching for any trace of human remains or the missing camera that likely corresponded with the SD card. The terrain was difficult, the undergrowth thick. The searches expanded outward in concentric circles, covering several square miles of rugged wilderness. They used ground-penetrating radar and aerial drones equipped with high-resolution cameras to scan the area, looking for any anomaly that might indicate a clandestine grave. But they found nothing conclusive. No remains, no camera, no additional clues that could explain the circumstances of Piper's disappearance. The mystery deepened. The discovery of the gear had confirmed that Piper was in the park, but the circumstances surrounding the abandoned tent and the hidden SD card remained agonizingly unclear. The investigation stalled again, waiting for a breakthrough from the digital forensic lab, hoping that the damaged SD card still held the answers they desperately sought. The silence of the wilderness seemed to mock their efforts, concealing the truth beneath a veil of indifference. Weeks stretched into a month as the digital forensic lab continued the painstaking process of data recovery. The work was agonizingly slow, a microscopic reconstruction of fragmented digital information. The investigators waited, the case suspended in a state of limbo, entirely dependent on the success or failure of the lab team. The specialized equipment hummed constantly, a testament to the tedious effort of rebuilding a digital life from the brink of oblivion. The technicians worked in shifts, their eyes strained from the constant focus on the microscopic details of the damaged memory chips. Then, in late August 2017, a partial breakthrough occurred. It was not the dramatic recovery of images or videos that everyone had hoped for. The visual data remained irretrievably corrupted, the memory sectors where the actual media were stored too severely degraded. The files were too damaged to be reconstructed. The images of Piper's final moments remained lost to the ravages of time. But the lab team achieved a minor critical success. They managed to extract fragmented metadata from the card's file allocation table, FAT. The FAT acts as a directory, an index storing information about the files on the card, including the date and time they were created, their size, and crucially, their location on the memory chip. While the files themselves were gone, the directory remained partially intact, a ghostly echo of the data that once existed. It was like finding the index of a burned book, providing clues about the contents even if the pages themselves were gone. Amidst the corrupted data, the team identified a cluster of information that immediately drew their attention. It contained GPS coordinates and a timestamp. The coordinates corresponded to a date shortly after Piper's initial disappearance in September 2015. This confirmed that the SD card had been used after she vanished, validating the theory that Piper had documented the events leading up to her fate. It was the first concrete evidence of her movements since she stepped onto the trail, a digital breadcrumb trail leading into the unknown. The location pinpointed by the coordinates was several miles from the site where the tent and gear were discovered. It was in a remote, rugged area of the park known for its complex karst topography, a landscape characterized by limestone formations, sinkholes, and caves. It was an area rarely visited by casual hikers, known only to experienced outdoorsmen and specialized researchers. The terrain was notoriously difficult to navigate, riddled with unmarked caves and unstable rock formations. The discovery of the coordinates injected a new sense of urgency into the investigation. It provided a specific location, a target for a focused search operation. The implications were profound. If Piper had been at these coordinates, the answers to the mystery might be found there. Authorities immediately organized an expedition to the location. Given the difficult terrain and the potential complexity of the cave system, a specialized search and rescue tactical team was assembled. This was not a standard hiking trail. It was a remote wilderness area requiring technical expertise and specialized equipment. The team was comprised of experienced mountaineers, cave rescue specialists, and tactical officers prepared for the possibility of encountering hazardous conditions or even a crime scene. They were equipped with technical climbing gear, specialized lighting equipment, and portable communication systems. The expedition launched in early September 2017. The team embarked on a multi-day operation. The approach to the coordinates was grueling. They navigated through thick forests, crossed fast-moving streams, and ascended steep rocky slopes. The terrain was treacherous, characterized by loose scree and unstable rock formations. The risk of injury was constant. They had to employ technical maneuvering, utilizing ropes to navigate the steep inclines and sheer drop-offs. The exertion was extreme, the thin air taxing their endurance. The silence of the wilderness was absolute, broken only by the sound of their own movements and the wind whistling through the canyons. As they approached the target area, the landscape became increasingly rugged and desolate. Limestone cliffs rose abruptly from the forest floor, the ground riddled with fissures and depressions. The karst topography created a maze of fractured rock and stunted trees. The atmosphere was oppressive, the silence profound. They were miles from the nearest trail, in an area seemingly untouched by human presence. The coordinates led them to a narrow fissure in the rock face, partially obscured by vegetation. It was easily missed, a dark shadow in the rugged landscape. It was an unmarked cave entrance, hidden from casual observation. The entrance was small, requiring the team to crawl through a narrow passage, the rock pressing in on them, the darkness absolute. The passage opened into a larger chamber, the air cold and damp. The team entered the cave system cautiously, their headlamps cutting through the absolute darkness. The silence was broken only by the dripping of water and the sound of their own movements. The cave was complex, with multiple passages branching off from the main chamber. The beam of their headlamps illuminated the rough rock walls and the uneven floor, the shadows dancing in the periphery. The atmosphere was claustrophobic, the weight of the mountain pressing down on them. They began a systematic search of the cave, moving slowly and methodically. They searched for any sign of disturbance, any indication that someone had been there. Near the entrance area, in the main chamber, where the faint light of the outside world still penetrated the gloom, they made a discovery. Partially buried beneath a layer of dust and debris was an aluminum water bottle. It was a specific type of bottle, distinctive in its design and color. The team photographed it in situ before collecting it as evidence. The bottle was dented and scratched, but otherwise intact. It was transported back to the forensic lab for analysis. Jarek and Myrna Krumvida were shown photographs of the water bottle. They identified it immediately. It was one that Piper carried on all her hikes, a gift from her father. The emotional impact of the discovery was profound. It was the first tangible proof that Piper had been in the cave. It was a heartbreaking connection to their daughter's final moments. However, the forensic testing on the bottle yielded disappointing results. Due to the environmental degradation over the 2 years, no usable DNA or fingerprints could be recovered. The bottle had been exposed to the damp conditions of the cave, erasing any trace evidence that might have linked Piper or anyone else to the object. The bottle was clean, offering no forensic answers. The evidence was highly circumstantial. The water bottle, combined with the metadata from the SD card, strongly suggested that Piper was in the cave. But it did not prove it definitively, and it did not explain what had happened to her there. The mystery deepened, becoming more complex and agonizingly unclear. How did her gear end up miles away from the cave? If she had been injured or incapacitated in the cave, why did she leave? And what prompted her to hide the SD card in her shoe? The cave expedition had provided a new location, a new focus for the investigation, but it had also generated more questions than answers. The investigators were left staring at a map, tracing the distance between the cave and the discovery site, trying to understand the movements of a missing officer in the final moments of her life. The case remained unsolved, the truth hidden somewhere in the rugged wilderness of the Rockies, concealed within the darkness of the unmarked cave. The ambiguity of the cave discovery left the investigation in a precarious position. While the metadata and the water bottle strongly suggested Piper's presence in the remote location, the lack of definitive forensic evidence meant they could not rule out other possibilities. The connection was circumstantial, and in a case involving a missing police officer, circumstantial evidence was not enough to build a solid case. Frustrated by the lack of progress and the absence of other leads, the investigators decided to revisit the initial stages of the investigation, looking for any oversight or missed opportunity from the 2015 search. They needed to find a human element, a witness, something that could provide context to the fragmented digital evidence. They began a meticulous recanvass of every location near the park boundaries, including those that had been dismissed during the initial investigation. It was during this exhaustive review that they finally focused on the High Alpine Lodge. The lodge, a remote, seasonal establishment located slightly off the main trails, had been overlooked in the initial investigation. It was deemed an unlikely detour for a solo hiker focused on a demanding thru-hike. But 2 years later, with the evidence suggesting Piper had deviated significantly from her planned route, the lodge became a critical point of interest. It was a long shot, a desperate attempt to find a thread in the tangled web of the investigation. In October 2017, 2 investigators drove the winding mountain road to the High Alpine Lodge. The lodge was a rustic wooden structure perched on a ridge overlooking a vast valley. The air was crisp with the scent of pine in the approaching winter. The atmosphere was quiet, the tourist season winding down. The lodge felt isolated, a solitary outpost in the vast wilderness. They spoke with Quilla Brasher, the owner and server at the lodge. Quilla, a woman in her late 50s with a weathered face and sharp eyes, had run the lodge for over 2 decades. She knew the rhythms of the park and the habits of the hikers who passed through. She was observant, accustomed to the transient nature of her clientele. The investigators explained the purpose of their visit and showed her a photograph of Piper Crumweed, the vibrant, smiling image of her on a previous hike, the mountains stretching out behind her. They asked the routine questions, not expecting much given the passage of time. They had conducted hundreds of similar interviews, most yielding nothing more than vague recollections and expressions of sympathy. The reaction was immediate. Quilla recognized her. She stared at the photograph for a long moment, her expression shifting from recognition to certainty. Yes, she remembered this woman. She had visited the lodge in September 2015, around the time of the disappearance. The memory was vivid, triggered by the photograph. The investigators felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the first confirmed sighting of Piper since she entered the park. It was a breakthrough, a moment that could change the course of the investigation. But the next piece of information Quilla provided transformed the case entirely. Piper was not alone. Quilla recalled that the woman in the photograph was having lunch and engaged in friendly conversation with a man. They had sat at a table near the window, talking animatedly. The detail was vivid, the memory clear. She recalled their interaction as relaxed and comfortable. They seemed to be enjoying each other's company. This revelation hit the investigators like a thunderbolt. For 2 years, the investigation had operated under the assumption that Piper was hiking solo. The possibility of another person being involved had been considered, but there had been no evidence to support it. Now, a credible witness placed Piper in the company of an unknown man shortly before she vanished. The investigators pressed Quilla for details about the man. She described him as charming, physically fit, and appearing to be an experienced outdoorsman or perhaps a local guide. He carried himself with confidence, comfortable in the wilderness environment. He was approximately the same age as Piper, perhaps slightly older. He was dressed in technical gear, suggesting he was prepared for the rugged terrain. Crucially, Quilla recalled no signs of distress or red flags. The interaction between Piper and the man appeared friendly, even familiar. Piper was single, and meeting someone during hiking was not unusual, but in the context of her disappearance, the implications were profound. The transaction was paid in cash, leaving no credit card records. And the lodge, true to its rustic nature, had no CCTV cameras. There was no physical evidence linking the man to the lodge, only Quilla's memory. The implications were staggering. If Piper had met someone during her hike, why had this man never come forward? In a high-profile missing person case involving a police officer, it was inconceivable that someone who had shared a meal with the victim shortly before her disappearance would remain silent. His silence suggested something far more sinister. It suggested complicity. The investigators immediately mobilized. This was the first tangible lead in the case, a potential suspect. They began the process of preparing a composite sketch based on Quilla's description, intending to release it to the public and generate leads. The atmosphere at the command center was electric, a renewed sense of hope surging through the investigation. They cross-referenced the description with known local guides, park employees, and anyone with a history of operating in the area. The investigation was energized, the momentum building. However, the next morning, before the composite sketch could be completed, the lead detective received a phone call. It was Quilla Brasher. Her voice was hesitant, apologetic. She explained that after the investigators left, she had spent the evening looking at the photographs of Piper Crumweed online, comparing them to her memory of the woman in the lodge, and now she was convinced she had made a mistake. The woman she saw was not Piper. Quilla cited subtle differences in appearance, the shape of the face, the color of the hair. She explained that the passage of time had clouded her memory, and her initial recognition had been faulty. She explained that she saw hundreds of hikers every season, many of whom resembled Piper, fit, blonde, adventurous women. She apologized profusely for the confusion, emphasizing that she wanted to be absolutely certain before providing information in such a serious case. The retraction was unequivocal. Quilla was adamant that she had been mistaken. The investigators were stunned. The lead that had seemed so solid, so promising, evaporated in an instant. They pressed Quilla, questioning her sudden change of heart. Had someone contacted her? Had she been threatened? They looked for any sign of coercion or intimidation, but Quilla insisted that the retraction was genuine. She simply realized she had been mistaken. Her demeanor was sincere, her regret palpable. Faced with the witness's unequivocal retraction and a complete lack of corroborating evidence linking Piper to the lodge, the investigators were forced to make a difficult decision. They downgraded the lead, assuming Quilla's memory was genuinely faulty. Eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, especially after a significant passage of time. The possibility of an unknown man remained, but without a credible sighting, it was impossible to pursue. The investigation stalled again, the frustration mounting. The breakthrough that had seemed so close had slipped through their fingers. The case returned to a state of inertia, the mystery of Piper Crumweed's disappearance seemingly destined to remain unsolved. The mountains kept their silence, the truth hidden beneath a veil of shifting memories and missed opportunities. The trail had gone cold once more, leaving the investigators with nothing but the silent wilderness and the unanswered questions. By the spring of 2018, the investigation into the disappearance of Piper Crumweed had gone completely cold. The discovery of the gear, the hidden SD card, the metadata pointing to the cave, all had led to dead ends. The retracted sighting at the High Alpine Lodge had been a particularly crushing setback, leaving investigators with no tangible leads and no clear direction. The case was filed away, joining the ranks of unsolved mysteries that haunt the wilderness areas of the American West. The investigation seemed destined to remain unsolved, another tragedy swallowed by the vastness of the Rocky Mountains. It was during a routine cold case review that a flicker of possibility emerged, not from a dramatic breakthrough in the field, but from the depths of bureaucratic records. An investigator, new to the case and tasked with reviewing the exhaustive files, decided to take a different, unconventional approach. Instead of focusing on the wilderness aspects of the case, they began a deep dive into Piper's professional background, looking for any connection, however tenuous, that might have been overlooked. He was looking for a link between her life as a police officer and the environment where she vanished. The investigator dug deep into Piper's police academy training records. It was a tedious process, sifting through years of bureaucratic paperwork, course syllabi, and personnel files. It was during this meticulous review that they noticed a specialized course Piper had taken several years prior. Wilderness Tactical Operations. The course, designed to train officers in specialized skills for operating in remote wilderness environments, tracking, survival, high-angle rescue, was taught by contracted civilian experts. Experienced mountaineers, survivalists, and guides brought in for their specialized knowledge. The investigator realized that this represented a potential link between Piper's professional life and the wilderness where she vanished. It was a pool of individuals with the skills and knowledge to navigate the remote areas of the park, individuals who had interacted with law enforcement personnel, including Piper. They initiated a process that is often overlooked in missing person investigations, cross-referencing the historical contractor list from the training course with known local guides operating in the Rocky Mountain National Park area. It was a long shot, a bureaucratic needle in a haystack, a desperate attempt to find a connection in the absence of any other viable leads. The process took weeks of painstaking data entry and analysis. It involved requests for archived records, cross-referencing multiple databases, and manually comparing lists of names. The databases were extensive, the overlap minimal. Most of the contractors were based in other states or no longer active in the field. But then a match emerged. Vaughn Goad, a highly regarded local tour guide operating in Rocky Mountain National Park. Goad had occasionally consulted for law enforcement years prior, providing expertise in wilderness navigation and survival skills. Although he hadn't taught Piper directly, his name appeared on the broader contractor database associated with the Wilderness Tactical Operations course. He was part of the community of experts that Piper had trained with. The connection was tenuous, but it was the first new lead in months. The investigator checked Goad's physical description against the one Quilla Brasher had initially provided before her retraction. It was a loose alignment, fit, experienced outdoorsman, approximately the right age, charismatic. The investigator initiated a deep background check on Vaughn Goad. The results were alarming. Goad had a significant criminal history, concealed beneath a veneer of respectability. 15 years earlier, he had been convicted of aggravated robbery, a violent felony for which he served 10 years in state prison. The conviction had been hidden from public view, but accessible to law enforcement. The revelation was staggering. A convicted felon operating as a tour guide in Rocky Mountain National Park with a potential link to a missing police officer. The pieces began to fall into place. Goad's expertise in the wilderness, his knowledge of the remote cave area, which investigators discovered he was known to frequent as a guide, often taking clients to hidden gems off the marked trails, and the retracted sighting at the lodge, it all pointed toward a chilling possibility. The circumstantial evidence was mounting. The investigation mobilized immediately, but they knew they had to proceed with extreme caution. Goad was an experienced outdoorsman, an expert survivalist, capable of vanishing into the wilderness if he suspected he was under investigation. Approaching him at his home or business was deemed too risky. He could disappear into the mountains, triggering a manhunt that could last months or even years. They needed to apprehend him in the field, in his element, where they could control the environment and prevent him from fleeing. They needed to execute a tactical operation that would catch him completely off guard. Investigators began tracking Von Goad's movements. They learned that he was currently leading a private, multi-day tour group deep in the park. This presented a unique opportunity, but also a significant challenge. They had to extract Goad without alerting his clients or endangering the public. The operation required a delicate balance of tactical precision and discretion. A plan was devised. A specialized tactical team trained in wilderness operations would intercept the group in a remote area of the park. They would operate undercover, posing as park rangers, conducting a routine safety check. The operation launched in early June 2018. The tactical team, equipped with specialized gear and communication equipment, inserted into the wilderness by helicopter. They tracked Goad's group for 2 days, maintaining surveillance from a distance, moving parallel to the group through the dense forest, waiting for the right moment to strike. The tension was palpable. The team knew they were dealing with a skilled adversary in his own territory. They moved silently, communicating with hand signals, their movements precise and coordinated. The intercept occurred near a treacherous pass, a narrow ridge with steep drop-offs on either side. The terrain was difficult, the altitude high, the exposure extreme. It was a location where escape would be impossible, a natural bottleneck where the group would be forced to slow down and concentrate on the terrain. 2 undercover officers, dressed as park rangers, approached the group. They were calm, professional, masking the adrenaline surging through their veins. They greeted Goad and his clients, explaining that they were conducting an urgent park regulation check, citing concerns about recent bear activity in the area and the need to verify the permits of all guides operating in the area. Goad, seemingly unconcerned, complied with the request. He produced his permit, confident in his cover. He engaged the officers in conversation, his demeanor relaxed and charming. The officers engaged him in conversation, slowly separating him from the group, isolating him near the edge of the trail, away from the clients. They moved him out of earshot under the guise of administrative necessity. The moment Goad was isolated, the demeanor of the officers shifted instantly. The friendly facade evaporated, replaced by the cold professionalism of a tactical arrest. They informed Goad that he was under arrest for the disappearance of Piper Crumweed. They moved quickly to secure him in handcuffs. Goad was stunned, his face paling beneath his tan. The realization of his situation hit him with the force of the mountain wind. He realized too late that he had been outmaneuvered. The arrest was executed swiftly and professionally. The extraction was executed flawlessly, the clients unaware of the true nature of the operation until Goad was led away, escorted by the tactical team. He was airlifted out of the park and transported directly to an interrogation room in Denver. Goad was transported to a secure facility in Denver and brought in for questioning. The interrogation room was small, the atmosphere sterile. The investigators laid out the evidence against him, the connection to the police training database, his expertise in the remote cave area, the implication of the metadata from the SD card, and his hidden criminal past. They also mentioned the initial identification by Quilla Brasher, implying they had an eyewitness placing him with Piper at the lodge. Goad initially denied any involvement, maintaining his composure, relying on his charisma and his reputation as a respected guide. but the weight of the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. The investigators pressed him, highlighting the inconsistencies in his story, the gaps in his timeline. They painted a picture of a man trapped by his past, confronted with the consequences of his actions. Faced with the mounting evidence and realizing that the investigation had uncovered his hidden past, Goad's facade began to crack. He understood the gravity of the situation. A missing police officer, a hidden criminal history. The implications were catastrophic. Realizing that cooperation might offer his best strategy for a potentially reduced sentence, Vaughn Goad made a decision. He decided to confess. The silence in the room was absolute as he began to recount the events of September 2015, finally revealing the fate of Piper Crumweed. Vaughn Goad's confession detailed a narrative of chance encounter, rapid intimacy, and sudden unpremeditated violence. He confirmed that he had indeed met Piper Crumweed at the High Alpine Lodge in September 2015, validating Quilla Brasher's initial identification. Goad described an immediate connection between them. He was captivated by her intelligence and adventurous spirit. She was drawn to his confidence and expertise as a wilderness guide. The chemistry was undeniable. They decided to hike together, abandoning their respective solo plans. The interaction quickly turned intimate. That night, they set up camp together. Goad confessed they had consensual sex, a connection fueled by the intensity of the moment and the isolation of the wilderness. The next morning, they packed up the camp, taking their gear with them, intending to continue their hike together. Goad offered to show her one of his magic spots, a hidden cave, a secret known only to experienced locals. They reached the cave, the location corresponding to the metadata found on the SD card. Inside the secluded environment, their conversation became more personal. Goad, feeling a sense of trust and connection, made a fateful decision. He disclosed his past, including his 10-year prison sentence for aggravated robbery. He claimed he wanted to be honest with her, perhaps believing their connection was strong enough to withstand the revelation. The revelation shattered the burgeoning relationship. Piper's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her instincts as a police officer took over. The realization that she was alone in a remote cave with a convicted felon triggered an immediate sense of alarm. She became uncomfortable, the trust evaporating. She demanded to leave. An argument ensued. The confrontation escalated quickly. Goad claimed that Piper became agitated and slapped him, a reaction fueled by anger and betrayal. He reacted instinctively, shoving her forcefully. The confined space of the cave amplified the violence of the act. Piper fell backward, striking her head violently on a sharp rock formation. She lost consciousness instantly. Goad panicked. He checked her pulse, finding it faint and erratic. Believing he had killed a police officer, the realization of the consequences paralyzed him. Fearing a life sentence, he made a split-second decision. He fled the cave, leaving Piper and her gear behind, desperate to escape the scene of the crime. Based on Goad's confession and the evidence collected, investigators constructed a final theory of Piper Crumweed's last moments. They believed Piper regained consciousness after Goad fled, likely severely injured with a traumatic brain injury, and disoriented. Recognizing the gravity of her situation, her police training kicked in. She attempted to document her situation, explaining the SD card metadata, though the camera was never found, likely lost or discarded during the subsequent events, before hiding the card in her shoe as evidence. They theorized that Piper, driven by a desperate will to survive, managed to retrieve her tent and essential gear from the cave and attempted to hike out of the remote area. Her injuries were too severe. She traveled several miles before collapsing, the gear scattering where it was eventually found by Elian Wilder. She succumbed to her injuries, or the elements, alone in the wilderness. A final intensive search operation was launched in the difficult terrain between the cave and the gear discovery site, utilizing details from Goad's confession. The search was arduous, the terrain treacherous. During this exhaustive effort, specialized cadaver dogs located Piper Crumweed's skeletal remains deep beneath a rock overhang, hidden from view. The discovery of the remains corroborated Gode's account. The forensic analysis confirmed the identity of the remains and the presence of a severe head injury consistent with the fall described by Gode. Vaughn Gode subsequently pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. For Jarek and Myrna Crumvide, the discovery of their daughter's remains brought a devastating closure, ending years of agonizing uncertainty, allowing them to finally mourn the tragic loss of a dedicated officer and a beloved daughter.